The glass doors of the restaurant felt heavier than usual as I pushed them open. I could already hear the familiar roar of the Reynolds family in full celebration mode, the clinking of expensive wine glasses, the high-pitched laughter of my sister Madison, and the booming voice of my father recounting some mundane story about his accounting firm. I stepped inside, my breath hitching in my throat. I was 24 years old, an adult by every legal definition, yet walking into this room made me feel like a small, trembling child again. I looked down at my hands. They were empty. No car keys jingling in my pocket, no heavy keychain to toss onto the valet stand. Just a smartphone with a notification from the Uber app telling me my ride had completed, and a receipt for $24 was waiting in my inbox. I stood there for a moment, adjusting my dress, trying to find the courage to face the 40 people waiting at the long, linen-covered tables. This was my grandmother Eleanor's 70th birthday. It was supposed to be a night of joy, but for me, it felt like walking into a lion's den, where the lions were wearing pearls and Sunday best. As I approached the table, the conversation didn't stop, but the eyes shifted. My mother, Diane, was at the head of the table, looking radiant in a cream-colored silk blouse. Beside her sat Madison, glowing with the easy confidence of the favorite child, her blonde hair perfectly curled, her husband Derek's arm draped over the back of her chair. They looked like a magazine advertisement for the perfect suburban life. And then there was me, Arya, the flexible one, the one who lived in the margins of their stories. "Arya, you finally made it," my mother chirped, though her eyes immediately scanned the area behind me. "Where's the car, honey? Did you park in the back?" The room went quiet. 40 sets of eyes, including Grandma Eleanor's sharp, observant gaze, landed on me. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. I hadn't intended to make a scene. I had planned to pull my mother aside later, to speak quietly, to be the adult I always tried to be. But she had thrown the first stone in front of everyone. "I took an Uber, Mom," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "An Uber?" Madison piped up, a smirk playing at the corners of her mouth as she adjusted her toddler, Ethan, on her lap. "But Arya, it's such a beautiful night for a drive. Why would you waste money on a car service when you have that lovely SUV Grandma gave you?" I looked at my mother. She didn't flinch. She didn't look guilty. Instead, she took a slow sip of her wine, set the glass down, and smiled that practiced, maternal smile, the one she used when she was about to dismiss my entire existence. "Oh, Madison needed it more, didn't she?" Mom said, addressing the table at large as if she were explaining a simple math problem. "Madison has the baby and her van is in the shop. Arya is single. She works from home on her little computer projects. Uber is much more convenient for her lifestyle. We all have to make sacrifices for family, don't we, Arya?" The silence that followed was suffocating. In that moment, I wasn't a person to them. I was a resource. I was a spare part to be harvested whenever Madison's life hit a speed bump. I looked over at Grandma Eleanor. She didn't say a word. She just watched, her hands folded neatly on the table, her eyes tracking the exchange like a hawk. No one in that room realized it yet, but the foundation of our family was about to crumble. To understand how I got to that restaurant, how I became the girl who let her mother give away her birthday present without a fight, you have to understand the architecture of my childhood. I grew up in a house where love was a finite resource, and Madison had a lifetime subscription. My father was a man of numbers and ledgers, and my mother was a woman of optics. Madison was her masterpiece. They shared the same blonde hair, the same emerald eyes, and the same infectious, loud laugh that demanded every ear in the room. I, on the other hand, was a throwback to my father's side. Dark hair, quiet eyes, and a temperament that preferred the corner of a library to the center of a stage. From the time I could walk, I was told I was flexible. It sounded like a compliment when I was 5. "Arya, let Madison have the window seat. You're so flexible." "Arya, we're going to skip your dance recital because Madison has a cheer competition. You understand, right? You're so flexible." But by the time I was 10, I realized that flexible was just a polite word for expendable. It meant my needs were negotiable. It meant my feelings were secondary to the harmony of the house. If Madison was the sun, I was the shadow. only visible because of the light she cast, and easily ignored when the clouds rolled in. Madison followed the blueprint my mother had laid out with terrifying precision. She married Derek Clark, a stable man from a good family, at 24. She had Ethan a year later. She stayed within a 10-mile radius of our parents. I, however, chose a different path. I became a freelance content writer. I built a career out of words, working from a quiet apartment with a view of the city. To my mother, this wasn't a real job. Because I didn't wear a suit or commute to a cubicle, she assumed I was perpetually free. In her mind, my time had no value because it wasn't spent serving a traditional boss or a husband. "When are you getting a proper career?" she'd ask during our rare phone calls. "Madison is so busy with the baby and the committee, but you just sit at that computer. You must be so bored." She couldn't see the 5-figure contracts I signed. She couldn't see the pride I felt in paying my own rent without a single cent of help from them. She only saw what was missing: a husband, a child, and a life that mirrored hers. Then came my 24th birthday. For years, my birthdays had been afterthoughts: a card with a $20 bill, a quick dinner at a chain restaurant if I was lucky. But this year, Mom had sounded different. "Come to the house," she had said. "We have a surprise." I remember walking into their driveway and seeing it, a navy blue Honda CRV, sparkling under the afternoon sun, adorned with a massive red ribbon. It was beautiful. It was practical. It was mine. "Happy birthday, Arya," Mom had said, handing me the keys with a flourish. "We wanted you to have something reliable. Grandma Eleanor really insisted on it. She thought it was time you had something of your own." For 10 months, that car was my sanctuary. It was the first thing I ever owned that Madison hadn't touched first. It was my ticket to the mountains, to late-night grocery runs, to the feeling that, for once, I had been seen. I didn't know then that the car wasn't a gift, it was a loan, and the interest rate was my dignity. 3 weeks before the party, the nightmare began. I drove to my parents' house for a Sunday dinner I didn't want to attend. I pulled into the driveway and saw Madison's beat-up minivan parked on the curb. But when I looked into the garage, my heart stopped. There sat my navy blue SUV. My keys were in the ignition. Ethan's car seat was already bolted into the back. I walked into the kitchen, my blood cold. "Mom, why is my car in the garage?" She didn't even look up from the stove. "Oh, Madison needed to borrow it, honey. Her van has a transmission issue. It'll just be a few days." "Borrow it? Without asking me?" She finally turned, wiping her hands on her apron, her expression one of mild annoyance. "Don't be difficult, Arya. She has a baby. You work from home. What do you need a car for this week anyway? You can just Uber. It's more convenient for you." That was the moment the fuse was lit. I didn't know it yet, but that convenience was about to cost my mother everything she spent 30 years building. I stood in that kitchen, the smell of my mother's pot roast filling the air, feeling a sense of vertigo. It wasn't just about the car. It was about the casual, effortless way my life had been dismantled while I wasn't looking. My mother didn't even have the decency to look guilty. She moved around the kitchen with the grace of someone who believed her every whim was a divine decree. I watched her hand a sippy cup to Madison, who had just walked in looking frazzled, hair in a messy bun, playing the role of the overworked mother to perfection. "Oh, Arya, you're here," Madison said, not even looking at me as she shifted Ethan on her hip. "Thanks again for the car. The AC in my van gave out, and with the baby, I just couldn't risk him overheating. You're a lifesaver." "I didn't agree to be a lifesaver, Madison," I said, my voice tight. "I didn't even know you had my keys." The room went still. Madison's smile faltered, her bottom lip trembling just enough to signal to our mother that she was being attacked. "Arya, honestly," Mom snapped, her voice dropping the sugary sweetness. "Is this how you're going to act? Your sister is struggling. You're sitting in your apartment all day writing stories. Do you have any idea what it's like to manage a household and a toddler without a car? We're a family. We help each other." "Helping is when you ask," I countered. "This is taking. When am I getting it back?" "A few days," Mom said, waving a hand dismissively. "A week at most. Now let's eat. I don't want this drama ruining dinner." But a week became 2, then 2 weeks became 3. Every time I called, the story changed. The mechanic found another issue. The parts were on back order. The insurance was being tricky. Every time I pushed, I was met with the same wall of gaslighting. I was told I was being materialistic. I was told I was being selfish. I was told that my independence was a sign of a cold heart. I spent those 3 weeks trapped in my apartment. I had to cancel a meeting with a new client because the Uber fare to the city center during surge pricing was $50. I missed my favorite yoga class. I felt my world shrinking, turning back into the small, cramped space I had occupied as a teenager. I realized that by taking my car, they hadn't just taken a vehicle, they had taken my agency. They had put me back in my place, the invisible, flexible shadow. One night, a week before the party, I reached my breaking point. I called Madison directly. I didn't want to talk to Mom. I wanted to talk to the person actually driving my car. Mads, I'm serious. I need the car back by tomorrow morning. I have errands and I'm tired of paying for rides. Arya, I literally just got Ethan to sleep, she whispered, yelled into the phone. Can you not do this right now? Mom said it was fine. Mom doesn't own the car, Madison. I do. My name is on the title. Grandma gave it to me. There was a long pause on the other end. When Madison spoke again, her voice was no longer the tired mother. It was sharp, entitled, and ugly. Is that what you think? You think you're better than us because Grandma felt sorry for you? She gave you that car because you have nothing else, Arya. No husband, no kids, no life. She thought it might give you a reason to actually leave your house. And now you're throwing it in my face when I'm actually doing something meaningful with my life? The cruelty of it left me breathless. I'm coming to get it tomorrow, I said, my voice shaking. Don't bother, Madison sneered. The garage is locked, and Derek has the only other set of keys at his office. We'll talk at the party. Mom says we're going to settle this then. She hung up. I sat in the dark, my phone glowing in my hand, and for the first time in years, I cried. Not because of the car, but because of the realization that my sister didn't just take my property, she loathed me for having it. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I called Grandma Eleanor. I didn't want to tattle. I didn't want to cause a rift, but I needed to know if she knew what was happening. After all, she was the one who had funded the gift. Grandma? I asked when she picked up. It's Arya. Hello, my dear. Her voice was calm, like a cool breeze. I was wondering when you'd call. You sounded a bit quiet during our last video chat. I just wanted to check on you, for the party preparations. Arya, she said, her tone shifting. I'm 70, not blind. I know your mother and sister have been rearranging things. Tell me, how are you getting around these days? I hesitated. I didn't want to ruin her birthday week with my drama. I've been using Uber, Grandma. It's okay. Is it? She asked. There was a strange edge to her voice, something sharp and metallic. You know, your grandfather always said that the quietest people are the ones who see the most, but sometimes they wait too long to speak up. Don't wait too long, Arya. Your mother thinks she's the director of this play, but she's forgotten who owns the theater. I didn't understand what she meant then. I thought she was just being poetic, as she often was. We talked for another hour, but she didn't bring up the car again. Instead, she asked me about my work, about the stories I was writing, about my dreams for the future. She listened in a way my mother never had, with her full attention, as if every word I spoke was valuable. I'll see you at the party, Arya, she said before hanging up. And don't worry about being empty-handed. Sometimes, showing up exactly as you are is the loudest statement you can make. The day of the party arrived. I dressed in a simple, elegant black dress. I didn't have a car to wash or gas up. I just sat on my sofa and waited for the Uber to arrive. As the driver pulled up, I looked at the app. $24 to get to the restaurant. It felt like a tax on my existence. When I arrived at the restaurant, the scene played out exactly as I described. The public humiliation, my mother's flexible comment, the smug look on Madison's face as she sat there, knowing she had won. They thought they had successfully assimilated my life into theirs. They thought I would just sit down, eat my salad, and accept my role as the family martyr. But as the appetizers were cleared and the main courses were brought out, the atmosphere began to shift. It started with my father, who was looking increasingly uncomfortable. He kept glancing at Grandma Eleanor, who hadn't touched her food. She was just sitting there, watching my mother hold court, telling a story about how brave Madison was for handling a toddler and a broken van. "And really," Mom said, laughing, "it's worked out for the best. Arya is saving so much on insurance and gas right now. She should be thanking us." A few people at the table chuckled nervously. I looked at my plate, my knuckles white as I gripped my fork. Then, the sound of a spoon tapping against a crystal glass rang out. It wasn't my mother. It wasn't my father. It was Grandma Eleanor. She stood up slowly, her spine straight as a needle. The room fell silent. Even the waiters paused in their tracks. There was a presence about her in that moment that I had never seen before, a cold, regal authority that seemed to freeze the air. "Diane," Grandma said, looking directly at my mother, "that was a very interesting story. You've always had a talent for fiction." My mother's smile faltered. "Mom? What do you mean? I was just saying—" "I know what you were saying," Grandma interrupted, "and now I think it's time I said something. Since this is a family celebration, I have a few announcements to make regarding my estate and the gifts I've given this year." My mother's face lit up. She thought this was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment the inheritance was discussed. She leaned forward, eager. Madison straightened her posture, looking hopeful. I looked at Grandma. She caught my eye for a split second, and in that moment, I saw it. The grandfather look. The look of someone who had seen everything and was finally ready to act. "First," Grandma said, her voice echoing in the silent room, "we need to talk about the navy blue SUV." The restaurant seemed to shrink as Grandma Eleanor stood there, the candlelight catching the silver in her hair. My mother, Diane, was still wearing that expectant, greedy half-smile, leaning in as if she were about to receive a trophy. She truly believed Grandma was about to praise her for her resourcefulness in managing the family's assets. "The SUV," Grandma repeated, her voice as sharp as a diamond cutter. "It's a beautiful vehicle. I spent a long time picking it out. I wanted something with top-tier safety ratings, something reliable, something that would represent a fresh start for the person who truly deserved it. And we appreciate it so much, Mom," my mother chimed in, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "It's been a godsend for Madison and the baby. Truly, it was the best thing you could have done for the family." Grandma Eleanor turned her gaze slowly toward my mother. The silence that followed was heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. "I didn't give that car to the family, Diane, and I certainly didn't give it to Madison. I gave it to Arya, for her 24th birthday. It was a gift of independence, not a communal shuttle for whoever felt like taking it." Madison shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her face turning a blotchy red. "Grandma, I'm just borrowing it because my van—" "You aren't borrowing it, Madison," Grandma interrupted, her tone cold and precise. "You are driving a vehicle that does not belong to you, with keys that were taken under false pretenses, while the rightful owner is forced to pay for Ubers to attend my birthday. It is, by every legal definition, unauthorized use of a motor vehicle. In my day, we called that theft." A collective gasp rippled through the 40 family members seated at the long tables. My father looked like he wanted to disappear into the upholstery. My mother's smile didn't just fade, it curdled. "Mom, you're being dramatic," my mother said, her voice trembling with a mix of embarrassment and anger. "Arya didn't mind. She's flexible. She's always been happy to help her sister. It's just a car." "Is it just a car?" Grandma asked. She reached into her small beaded evening bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She laid it flat on the white tablecloth for everyone to see. It was a photocopy of the car's title. "I've lived 70 years, Diane. I've watched you treat one daughter like a queen and the other like an unpaid servant. I've watched you use the word flexible to bend Arya until she was nearly broken. And I decided that I wasn't going to let you do it with my money." She pointed to the signature line on the document. "When I bought that car, I didn't put it in your name, Diane. I didn't even put it in Arya's name initially, because I knew you would find a way to manipulate her into signing it over." I kept the title in my name, with Arya listed as the sole primary driver and the person who would inherit the title officially on her 25th birthday, provided the car was maintained. The room was so quiet, you could hear the distant clinking of dishes from the kitchen. My mother reached for the paper, but Grandma swiped it back. "But here is the interesting part," Grandma continued. "The insurance policy I took out on that car? It's a very specific, high-end policy. It only covers the primary driver, Arya, and it explicitly forbids the vehicle from being operated by anyone with a history of major traffic violations." She looked directly at Madison. My sister's eyes went wide. 2 years ago, Madison had been caught speeding in a school zone, a major infraction she had begged our parents to keep secret from Grandma so she wouldn't lose her good granddaughter status. "If that car is in an accident while Madison is driving," Grandma said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "not only is there zero insurance coverage, but the liability falls squarely on the person who authorized the use. That would be you, Diane, since you told Madison it was fine to take it." My mother's face went from red to a ghostly, sickly white. You're joking. You wouldn't do that to us." "I'm not doing anything to you," Grandma said, sitting back down and taking a calm sip of her water. "You did this to yourselves the moment you decided that Arya's property was yours to distribute. But we aren't finished. I didn't bring 40 people here just to talk about a Honda." I sat there, frozen. I felt a strange mixture of terror and exhilaration. For the first time in my life, someone was standing in the gap for me. Someone was saying out loud the things I had been screaming in my head for a decade. I looked at Grandma, and I realized that she wasn't just defending me, she was teaching me how to fight. "Grandma, please," Madison whined, her voice cracking. "I'm pregnant. I have Ethan. You can't expect me to just give the car back right now and be stranded." "Oh, you won't be stranded," Grandma said, a small, predatory smile playing on her lips. "Derek is here, isn't he? He can drive you home in his truck. As for the SUV, I've already taken care of it." "What does that mean?" My father finally spoke up, his voice cracking. "It means," Grandma said, looking at her watch, "that 10 minutes ago I called the towing company I have on retainer for my estate properties. I informed them that my vehicle was being held at your address without my permission. Since I am the legal owner on the title, and I have the spare set of keys, the car is currently being hooked up to a flatbed and moved to a secure location." Madison let out a muffled scream. My mother stood up, her chair screeching against the floor. "You towed it? From our garage? On your birthday?" "It's my birthday," Grandma said coolly, "and I decided to give myself the gift of justice. But Diane, sit down. We haven't even gotten to the main course yet, and I think the rest of the family would be very interested to hear about the changes I made to my will this morning." My mother sank back into her chair, looking like she had been struck. The power dynamic in the room had shifted so violently that it felt like the floor was tilting. I looked around at my aunts, uncles, and cousins. They weren't looking at me with pity anymore. They were looking at my mother and Madison with a newfound sense of clarity. The perfect family image had been shattered, and Grandma Eleanor was currently sweeping the pieces into a pile. "Arya," Grandma said, turning to me, her voice softening just a fraction. "I hope you don't mind. Your car will be delivered to your apartment tomorrow morning, freshly detailed, with a full tank of gas and a new set of locks. I think it's time you stopped being flexible, don't you?" I couldn't speak. I just nodded, tears finally stinging my eyes. But the night was far from over. Grandma Eleanor had been watching the invisible child for 24 years, and she had spent the last 6 months preparing a masterpiece of a rebuttal. "Now," Grandma said, tapping her spoon against the glass again, "let's talk about the house in the Hamptons." The mention of the house in the Hamptons acted like a physical shock to the room. My mother's eyes widened, and for a split second, a flash of pure, unadulterated greed crossed her face, before being replaced by a mask of confusion. My father, usually so stoic and focused on his ledgers, dropped his linen napkin onto his half-eaten steak. Even the distant relatives at the end of the table stopped whispering. "The Hamptons?" my mother whispered, her voice trembling. "Mom, you never told us you still had that property. We all thought you sold it after Dad passed away to cover the medical bills." Grandma Eleanor leaned back, the flickering candlelight reflecting in her eyes like a predator watching its prey in the brush. "That's what I wanted you to think, Diane. I wanted to see how this family would behave if they thought the big prize was off the table. I wanted to see who would show up for Sunday dinners when there wasn't a multi-million-dollar estate looming at the end of the tunnel." She looked around the room, her gaze lingering on each of my aunts and uncles before returning to my mother. "You were so quick to take charge of my life, Diane. You called meetings, you assigned roles, you decided who was better with people and who was busy with little computer things. You built a hierarchy based on who you thought would be most useful to you. And all the while, you were waiting for me to fade away so you could divide the spoils." "That's not fair!" Madison cried out, her voice hitting a shrill note that made baby Ethan whimper in her lap. "We've helped you. I came to see you twice a month. Derek fixed your leaky faucet." "Twice a month for 30 minutes, Grandma countered, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "Usually to ask for a loan for your newest business venture, or to complain about how expensive daycare is. And Derek? He didn't fix the faucet. He called a plumber and sent me the bill. I'm 70, Madison, not senile." She then turned her attention back to me. "During those same months, Arya called me every single Sunday. We didn't talk about money. We didn't talk about responsibilities. We talked about history and art and the books your grandfather loved. She knew I was lonely. You just knew I was an asset." My mother's face was a map of desperation. She knew she was losing control of the narrative. "Mom, please. This is a birthday party. Let's not do this in front of everyone. We can discuss the house privately." "No," Grandma said firmly. "Transparency is a wonderful thing, Diane. You've spent 24 years making Arya feel like she was the rough draft of a daughter. You gave away her birthday gift, a gift I paid for, because you thought she didn't have the teeth to bite back. Well, I'm the one with the teeth tonight." Grandma pulled a second document from her bag. This one was thick, bound in a professional blue folder with the seal of a prestigious law firm on the front. "This is the deed to the Hamptons property," she announced. "It's a 5-bedroom Victorian on the water. It's been in our family for 3 generations. Your father and I spent our happiest summers there. And according to the market analysis I received last week, it's worth significantly more than your father's entire retirement fund." I saw my father's throat hitch as he swallowed hard. My mother's hand went to her throat, her fingers clutching her pearl necklace. The air in the room was thick with the scent of old money and new resentment. "I had originally intended to leave this house to be shared between my 2 granddaughters," Grandma continued. "I wanted it to be a place where the family could gather, where the next generation could grow up together. I wanted to believe that the values your grandfather and I lived by, loyalty, respect, and fairness, had been passed down." She paused, looking at Madison, then at me. "But then I watched what you did with the SUV. I watched how easily you convinced yourselves that Arya didn't matter. I watched how you used your motherhood, Madison, as a weapon to take things from your sister. And I realized that if I left that house to both of you, you would find a way to push Arya out within a year. You would tell her she's single and doesn't need the space. You would tell her it's more convenient for you to live there because of the baby." Madison opened her mouth to protest, but the look in Grandma's eyes silenced her instantly. "So," Grandma said, her voice ringing out with a finality that felt like a gavel hitting a block, "I made a change. As of 8 o'clock this morning, the Hamptons house has been placed into a private trust. The sole beneficiary of that trust, with full rights to the property, the rental income, and any future sale, is Arya Reynolds." The silence wasn't just quiet this time. It was a vacuum. It felt like the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. My mother's jaw literally dropped. Madison's face went from red to a terrifying pale gray. You gave it all to her?" my mother stammered. "The whole house? But what about Madison? What about Ethan's inheritance?" "Madison has the life you blueprinted for her, Diane," Grandma said coolly. "She has the husband, the baby, the suburban house, and the proper career. She has everything you said Arya lacked, so I decided to give Arya something she's never had in this family, the power to say no." I felt like I was floating. The room, the people, the anger, it all felt miles away. I looked at the blue folder on the table. That house represented more than money. It represented a fortress. It was a place where I could go and never have to be flexible again. It was a shield against every convenient sacrifice my mother would try to force on me for the rest of my life. "And there's one more thing," Grandma said, her voice regaining that sharp, diamond-like edge. "Since you were so concerned about the convenience of Ubers, Diane, I've decided to take your advice. I'm selling my current home, the one you were so eager for me to move out of, and I'm moving into the guest cottage on the Hamptons property with Arya. I think I'll find it much more convenient." My mother looked like she was about to have a physical collapse. She had spent years positioning herself as the gatekeeper of Grandma's life, and in one evening, she had been completely locked out. "But Mom," my father whispered, "what about the rest of the estate? Surely you aren't cutting everyone else out." Grandma Eleanor looked at him with a sadness that bit deeper than her anger. "The rest of the estate will be handled according to the original will, Robert. But the jewels, the property, and the legacy? Those go to the person who saw me when I was invisible, not the ones who only saw me when they needed a check." She turned to me and reached out her hand across the table. I took it, her skin feeling like parchment, thin but incredibly strong. "Now," Grandma said, "I believe the kitchen is preparing a very special dessert. I suggest everyone stays and eats. After all, it's not every day you get to witness the end of an era." But the night wasn't over. As the family sat in stunned, miserable silence, my mother leaned across the table, her eyes burning with a dark, desperate fire. She wasn't done fighting. She was about to play her final, ugliest card. The air in the restaurant was thick, almost oily with tension. The waiters moved like ghosts, placing plates of decadent chocolate torte in front of guests who no longer had an appetite. My mother sat motionless, her eyes fixed on the blue folder as if she could set it on fire with her mind. I could see the gears turning behind her eyes. For Diane Reynolds, there was no such thing as a total defeat, only a temporary setback that required a more aggressive strategy. She took a long, shaky breath and straightened her posture. She didn't look at Grandma Eleanor this time. She looked directly at me. Her eyes were rimmed with red, and her voice, when she spoke, was no longer sharp. It was soft, wounded, and manipulative. "Arya," she whispered, loud enough for the immediate family to hear. "I know you're hurt. I know we've made mistakes, but do you really think this is right? Do you really want to be the reason your sister loses her future security? Do you want to look at little Ethan and know you took his inheritance because you were angry about a car?" "I didn't take anything, Mom," I said, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears, firmer, colder. "Grandma chose to give it to me." "Because you manipulated an old woman," Madison exploded, her voice cracking. "You've been whispering in her ear for years, haven't you? Playing the victim while I was out here actually doing the work of being a daughter." "Madison, sit down," Grandma warned, but my mother held up a hand. "No, Mom, let me speak to my daughter," Diane said, her voice trembling with manufactured pathos. "Arya, there's something you don't know, something I've kept from you to protect you, but since we're being transparent tonight, I think it's time you knew the truth about why things are the way they are." I felt a pit form in my stomach. This was her signature move, the secret burdens play. "When you were born," Mom began, a single tear tracing a path through her foundation, "it was a very difficult time. Your father's firm was struggling. We almost lost the house. I had to go back to work when you were only 6 weeks old. Madison had to grow up so fast to help me. She gave up her childhood to make sure you were taken care of. She was the one who stayed up with you when you had fevers because I was working 12-hour shifts. We owe her, Arya. This family owes her for the sacrifices she made when you were too young to remember." My father looked down at his plate, his silence confirming the narrative. This was the family debt I had been unknowingly carrying for 2 decades. The reason Madison always got the bigger room, the better car, the endless grace. "The reason I gave her your car," Mom continued, gaining momentum as she saw the doubt in my eyes, "was because I promised her, years ago, that I would always make sure she was okay. She carried us through our darkest year. Now, she's carrying the next generation. And here you are, taking a multi-million-dollar estate while your sister struggles to pay for a minivan? If you have any heart at all, You'll sign that trust over to a joint account. For the family. For Ethan. For a second, the old Arya, the flexible one, the shadow, wanted to apologize. I wanted to fix the discomfort in the room. I wanted my mother to stop looking at me with such profound disappointment. The weight of 24 years of conditioning was pulling at my shoulders, urging me to bow my head and say, "You're right, I'm sorry." But then, I felt Grandma's hand tighten on mine under the table. "That's a very touching story, Diane," Grandma Eleanor said, her voice cutting through the emotional fog like a lighthouse. "Except for one small detail. You didn't go back to work because you were struggling. You went back to work because you were bored. And Madison didn't give up her childhood. I was the one who paid for a full-time nanny for 3 years so you could buy that country club membership you wanted so badly." The table went dead silent. My mother's tear-stained face froze. "I have the bank statements, Diane," Grandma continued relentlessly. "I have the letters your father wrote me, thanking me for the lifeline I provided so you wouldn't have to stress. Madison didn't raise Arya. A woman named Maria raised Arya until she was 5. Don't you dare use your children's history as a weapon when I was the one who funded it." I looked at my mother. The mask didn't just slip, it shattered. The nurturing mother was gone, replaced by a woman who had been caught in a 20-year-old lie. "Arya," Grandma said, turning to me, "you don't owe anyone for the privilege of existing. You were a child. You were not a burden, and you were not a debt to be repaid. Your sister's choices and her lifestyle are hers to manage. You are not her insurance policy." I looked at Madison, who was staring at her mother in shock. Even she hadn't known the truth of that dark year. My mother had built a foundation of guilt to keep us in our places, and Grandma had just demolished it with a few sentences. I stood up. My chair didn't screech. It moved back with a quiet, deliberate click. I looked at my mother, then at my sister, and finally at my father, who still couldn't meet my eyes. "Mom," I said, and for the first time I didn't feel like a shadow. "I'm done being flexible. Tomorrow I'm going to meet with Grandma's lawyers. I'm going to take the car, and I'm going to take the house. Not because I'm greedy, but because I'm finally realizing that my life has value, even if it doesn't look like the one you wanted for me." "You're dead to me," Madison hissed, her voice full of venom. "Don't you ever ask me for anything. Don't you ever think you're part of my son's life." "I wouldn't dream of it," I replied calmly. "I'd hate to be a burden on your busy life." I turned to Grandma Eleanor. "Are you ready to go? I think we've had enough birthday cake for one night." "I am, my dear," she said, standing up with a grace that made every other person in the room look small. As we walked toward the exit, 40 pairs of eyes followed us. My mother was sobbing now, real sobs of rage and loss, but I didn't turn back. We stepped out into the cool night air, and I pulled out my phone to call a car. "No need for that," Grandma said, pointing toward the curb. A sleek black town car was waiting, the driver already holding the door open. "Where to, Miss Reynolds?" the driver asked. "The Hamptons," Grandma said, her eyes twinkling. "We have a lot of decorating to discuss." As the car pulled away, I saw my family standing at the restaurant windows, watching us leave. They looked like figures in a rearview mirror, getting smaller and smaller until they finally disappeared into the dark. 2 months had passed since the night of the birthday party, and for the first time in my 24 years, the air I breathed felt clean. The Hamptons house was more than a property. It was a fortress of silence and salt air. Every morning, I woke up to the sound of the Atlantic crashing against the shore, a rhythmic reminder that the world was much bigger than my mother's dining room table. Grandma Eleanor had settled into the guest cottage, which she had transformed into a vibrant studio filled with half-finished paintings and the smell of jasmine tea. But I knew the peace was fragile. My mother and Madison weren't the type to retreat quietly into the night. They were the type to regroup, sharpen their claws, and wait for a moment of weakness. I had blocked their numbers, but the silence from their end was louder than any shouting match. It was the silence of people consulting lawyers. It started with a registered letter. I was sitting on the wraparound porch, my little computer thing on my lap, finally finishing a lucrative contract for a travel magazine. The mail carrier handed me a thick manila envelope. No return address, just the name of a law firm in the city that specialized in family estate litigation. My heart hammered against my ribs as I tore it open. It wasn't a birthday card. It was a formal challenge to the trust Grandma Eleanor had established. The document was 20 pages of legal jargon, but the core message was clear. My mother and sister were claiming that Grandma Eleanor was not of sound mind when she altered her will and created the trust. They were accusing me of undue influence and elderly exploitation. I felt a wave of nausea. They weren't just coming for the house. They were trying to strip Grandma of her agency, her intelligence, and her dignity, all to get their hands on a piece of real estate. I walked over to the cottage, the letter trembling in my hand. I found Grandma in her garden, wearing a wide-brimmed straw hat, meticulously pruning her roses. "They did it, Grandma," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "They're suing us. They're telling the court you don't know what you're doing." Grandma didn't stop pruning. She snipped a dead bloom with clinical precision before turning to look at me. She didn't look scared. She looked expectant. "I wondered if they'd have the gall," she said softly. "Your mother always did have a high opinion of her own cunning." "They're calling me a manipulator," I said, the tears finally starting to spill. "After everything they did, they're making me the villain." "Arya, look at me," Grandma said, stepping closer and taking my face in her dirt-stained hands. "The truth is a stubborn thing. It doesn't change just because someone screams a lie at it. They think they can win because they think I'm a frail old woman and you're a quiet girl who's afraid of her own shadow. They've forgotten that shadows are only cast by a very strong light." She led me inside and sat me down at her small kitchen table. "When I set up that trust, I knew Diane would try this. I've known your mother since the day she was born, Arya. I know the shape of her greed. That's why I didn't just sign a piece of paper. I recorded every meeting with my lawyers. I had 3 independent psychiatrists evaluate me the day before the party, and I have a paper trail of every loan I ever gave Madison that she never paid back." I blinked, wiping my eyes. "You prepared for this? Even back then?" "Especially back then," she said. "Now, call the number on that business card I gave you. It's time our lawyers met their lawyers." The following week was a blur of depositions and dark-paneled offices. Because I was the beneficiary, I had to sit in a room while my mother's lawyer, a sharp-featured man named Mr. Thorne, tried to twist my words. "Is it true, Miss Reynolds, that you moved your grandmother to a remote location to isolate her from the rest of her loving family?" he asked, his voice dripping with false concern. "I didn't move her anywhere," I replied, looking him straight in the eye. "She invited me to live here, and she isn't isolated. She has more friends in this town than I do." "And the SUV," Thorne continued, tapping a pen against his chin. "You took that vehicle while your sister was in a state of medical vulnerability, expecting a child, with no other means of transport. Doesn't that strike you as predatory?" "The vehicle was mine," I said firmly. "It was stolen from me. Taking back what belongs to you isn't predatory, it's justice." In the corner of the room, I saw my mother. She was dressed in black, looking like a grieving widow, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Beside her, Madison looked tired, her pregnancy clearly weighing on her, but her eyes were cold and full of hate. They weren't looking at me like family, they were looking at me like an obstacle to be cleared. During a break in the deposition, I found myself alone in the hallway with Madison. She was standing by the water cooler, clutching her stomach. "You could end this, Arya," she said, her voice low. "Just give Mom half. That's all she wants. Half the house and the rental income. We'll drop the suit. We'll be a family again. Don't you miss Ethan?" "A family?" I asked, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "A family where you take my things and call me expendable? A family where Mom lies about who raised me to make me feel guilty? No, Madison, I don't miss that at all." "You're being so selfish," she hissed. "You have this huge house and you're all alone. I'm the one with the child. I'm the one who needs the security. You're just doing this to hurt us." "I'm not doing this to hurt you," I said, stepping closer. "I'm doing this because for the first time in my life, I don't have to care what you think. And as for Ethan, I hope he grows up to be nothing like you." The look on her face was worth every cent of the legal fees. The final blow of the legal battle came on the third day. My mother's lawyer produced what he thought was a smoking gun, a series of emails I had sent to Grandma over the last 2 years. He began reading them aloud, trying to frame my affection as a calculated attempt to secure the inheritance. "Look at this one," Thorne said. "Grandma, I'm so grateful for our talks. You're the only one who really hears me." Clearly, Miss Reynolds was grooming her grandmother, creating a rift between her and her difficult mother. Grandma Eleanor, who was sitting at the head of the table, suddenly started to laugh. It wasn't a bitter laugh. It was a sound of pure, genuine amusement. "Mr. Thorne," she said, leaning forward, "you've spent 3 days trying to prove I'm incompetent, but you've missed the most important document in that pile." She signaled to our lawyer, who pulled a small digital voice recorder from his briefcase. "This," Grandma said, "is a recording from 3 weeks ago. It was a phone call I received from my daughter, Diane. I believe in this state only one party needs to consent to a recording. Well, I consented." She hit play. My mother's voice filled the room, but it wasn't the soft, grieving voice she had been using for the lawyers. It was sharp, hysterical, and ugly. "Mom, listen to me. If you don't give me the deed to that house, I'll tell the court you've been losing your memory for years. I'll make sure everyone thinks you're crazy. I'll put you in a home and Arya won't be able to do a thing about it. Just sign the papers and we can all go back to normal." The room went deathly silent. My mother froze, her hand halfway to her face. Her own lawyer looked down at his notes, his face turning a deep shade of crimson. "Does that sound like a woman who thinks I'm incompetent?" Grandma asked the room. "Or does it sound like a woman committing extortion?" The case didn't just crumble, it vanished. Mr. Thorne requested a private huddle with his clients, and 10 minutes later, they withdrew the suit entirely. But the damage was done. The recording was now part of the legal record. As we walked out of the law firm, my mother tried to stop us one last time. She looked broken, her perfect facade lying in ruins at her feet. "Mom," she sobbed, reaching for Grandma's arm, "I didn't mean it. I was desperate." Grandma Eleanor didn't pull away. She looked at her daughter with a profound sense of pity. "Desperation doesn't create character, Diane. It reveals it. You've revealed yours. Now stay away from my granddaughter. If I hear from you or Madison or your lawyers again, I won't just record the calls. I'll release them to the local paper. I'm sure your proper friends in the suburbs would love to hear how you talk to your mother." We walked to the car, my navy blue SUV, which was parked right out front. I got into the driver's seat and Grandma got in beside me. As I pulled away, I looked in the rearview mirror. My mother and sister were standing on the sidewalk, looking smaller and more insignificant than they ever had before. "Where to now, Arya?" Grandma asked, a satisfied smile on her face. "Home," I said. "We have a garden to finish." But even then, as we drove toward the coast, I knew that the final chapter of this story wasn't just about winning a house. It was about what happened next. The unexpected visitor who would arrive at the Hamptons house a week later, changing everything I thought I knew about my father. A week after the legal battle collapsed, the Hamptons house felt different. The air was no longer thick with the threat of litigation. I spent my mornings on the deck, the salt spray misting my face as I worked, and my afternoons helping Grandma Eleanor plan her rose garden. We were finally at peace. Or so I thought, until a silver sedan I recognized all too well pulled into the long gravel driveway. It wasn't my mother's car, and it wasn't Madison's. It was my father's. Robert Reynolds was a man of habit and silence. He was the kind of person who disappeared into the background of his own life, a man who preferred the cold logic of an Excel spreadsheet to the messy emotions of a dinner table. Seeing him here, 5 hours away from his office on a Tuesday, was like seeing a ghost in broad daylight. Grandma Eleanor was on the porch, a book in her lap. She didn't stand up. She just watched him get out of the car, his shoulders slumped, his suit jacket looking a size too large for his frame. "Arya," he said, nodding to me as I stepped out to meet him. "Grandma." "Robert," Grandma said, her voice neutral. "I assume you aren't here for the ocean view." "I need to talk to both of you," he said, his voice gravelly. "Privately, without Diane." I led him into the kitchen. I made a pot of coffee, the familiar ritual grounding me as the tension returned to the room. My father sat at the oak table, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a month. "I didn't know about the lawsuit," he said suddenly, looking at Grandma. "Not the details. Diane told me she was just consulting someone to ensure the trust was legal. I didn't know she was claiming you were incompetent. I didn't know about the recording until it was over." "You were at the table, Robert," Grandma said, her voice sharp. "You sat through the depositions. You heard your wife's lawyer call your daughter a predator. You didn't say a word." My father flinched as if she had slapped him. "I've spent 30 years not saying a word, Eleanor. That's been my job. Diane handles the social side, the family narrative. I handle the numbers. I thought if I just kept my head down and worked, the storm would pass." "The storm didn't pass," I said, leaning against the counter. "It leveled my life, Dad. You watched them take my car. You watched them humiliate me at Grandma's party. You were the accountant. You knew exactly what was happening." He looked at me then, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes that wasn't just calculations. It was shame. "I'm an accountant, Arya. You're right, and that's why I'm here. Because I've been looking at the books. Not the ones Diane sees, but the real ones." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a stack of ledgers and bank statements. He pushed them across the table toward us. "Diane and Madison have been spending money like it's water for years," he whispered. "The country club, the designer clothes for Ethan, the investments Derek was supposedly making. I tried to tell them we were overextended, but Diane would just say that Grandma's inheritance would cover it eventually. She's been living on credit, based on a future that didn't exist." I scanned the statements. The numbers were staggering. Credit card debts in the 6 figures. A second mortgage on my parents' house that I never knew existed. "Why are you telling us this now?" Grandma asked. "Because the lawsuit was the last straw," my father said, his voice cracking. "Diane used the last of our liquid savings to pay that lawyer, Mr. Thorne. She was so sure she'd win the Hamptons house and sell it to clear the debts. Now that the case is dropped, we're weeks away from foreclosure." The silence that followed was heavy. My mother, the woman who had judged my little computer thing and my unstable freelance career, had managed to bankrupt the family while trying to maintain the image of perfection. "But that's not the reason I drove 5 hours," my father continued. He looked at me, his eyes filling with tears. "Arya, I'm sorry. I let her turn you into the flexible one because it was easier for me. If you were quiet, I didn't have to deal with the noise. I traded your happiness for my own peace and quiet. I was a coward." It was the first time my father had ever apologized to me, not for a small mistake, but for the entire structure of my childhood. "There's more," he said, pulling out a small yellowed envelope from the back of his ledger. "This was from your grandfather. He left it in his safety deposit box with instructions that I should only give it to you when you were ready. He knew, Arya. He knew how Diane was. He knew I wouldn't have the spine to stand up to her." I took the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note and a small antique key. "To my Arya," the note read, "the one who watches and waits. Your grandmother has the house, but the foundation is yours. Check the basement of the Hamptons house, behind the 3rd stone from the furnace. Some things should never be part of a public ledger." My heart skipped a beat. Grandma Eleanor stood up, her eyes wide. "The furnace stone?" Henry always was a romantic about his secrets. My father stood up too. "I don't want the house, Arya. I don't want the money. I just wanted you to know that I've filed for legal separation from your mother. I can't live in that lie anymore. I'm moving into a small apartment near the city. I'm going to try to pay off what I can, but I'm done being the ghost in the room." I looked at my father, this man who had been a stranger to me for 24 years. He looked broken, but for the first time, he looked real. "Do you want some more coffee, Dad?" I asked. It wasn't a full forgiveness. It wasn't a reset of our relationship, but it was a bridge. He nodded, a small, sad smile touching his lips. That night, after my father had left, Grandma and I went down to the basement with a flashlight and a crowbar. We found the 3rd stone. It was loose, the mortar crumbling with age. I pulled it back, my hands covered in dust, and reached into the dark cavity behind it. My fingers brushed against a heavy metal box. I pulled it out and set it on the cold concrete floor. The antique key from the envelope fit perfectly into the lock. As the lid creaked open, Grandma Eleanor let out a soft gasp. Inside weren't gold bars or piles of cash. It was something far more valuable, and far more dangerous for my mother if it ever saw the light of day. The basement of the Hamptons house felt like a tomb, silent and smelling of damp earth and old memories. The beam of the flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the metal box that sat between me and Grandma Eleanor. My father's departure had left a lingering sadness in the air, but the weight of the box in my hands suggested that the past wasn't finished with us yet. I turned the key. The lock clicked with a heavy, mechanical sound, a sound that echoed against the stone walls. As I lifted the lid, I expected to see jewelry, or perhaps more legal documents. Instead, I saw layers of aged, leather-bound journals and a thick stack of photographs tied with a faded velvet ribbon. "Journals?" I whispered, pulling the first one out. Grandma Eleanor sat on an old wooden crate, her face pale in the flashlight's glow. "Not just any journals, Arya. Those are your grandfather's private logs. Henry was a man of few words, but he wrote down everything, every transaction, every conversation, every observation." I opened the first book. The handwriting was precise, the script of an architect. As I flipped through the pages, I realized this wasn't just a diary. It was a record of the family's true history. I began to read aloud, and as the words filled the basement, the myth of the perfect Reynolds family began to dissolve entirely. The journals revealed that decades ago, my mother hadn't just been bored or socially ambitious. She had been involved in a scandal that my grandfather had spent a fortune to bury. Long before I was born, when Madison was just a toddler, my mother had been caught embezzling funds from a local charity she chaired. She had used the money to fund the very lifestyle she claimed was hers by birthright. My grandfather had paid back every cent to keep her out of jail, but he had documented it all. The bank receipts, the confession she had written to him in a moment of panic, and the legal agreements that stipulated she would never have control over the family's core assets. She didn't just spend the money, I realized, looking at a photo of my mother from the late 80s, looking radiant and untouchable. She stole it, and Grandpa knew. That's why he never trusted her. That's why the car was in your name, Grandma. That's why the house was hidden. "He wanted to give her a chance to change," Grandma said, her voice trembling. "He thought that if she felt secure, she would stop. But Diane is like a vessel with a hole in the bottom. No amount of money or love is ever enough to fill her." But there was something else in the box. At the very bottom, beneath the journals, was a small sealed envelope addressed to the board of directors, the St. Jude's Children's Foundation. It was an unposted letter, written by my grandfather just months before he died. In it, he detailed the truth of the embezzlement, along with a check for a final interest payment to the charity. He had left it for me to find, not to destroy my mother, but to protect myself. It was the ultimate leverage. If this letter ever reached the foundation or the social circles my mother valued more than her own children, her reputation would be decimated. The proper life she had built for Madison and herself would vanish in an afternoon. I sat on the cold floor, the weight of the secret pressing down on me. I looked at the photos of my mother and Madison, always matching, always smiling, and then at the few photos of me, usually in the background, out of focus. I had spent my life wondering why I wasn't enough for her. Now I realized it was because I reminded her of the truth. I looked like my father's side, the side that kept the books, the side that saw through the lies. "What are you going to do with it, Arya?" Grandma asked. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I don't want to be like her. I don't want to use secrets as weapons." "You aren't using them as weapons," Grandma said firmly. "You are using them as a shield. Your father said she's desperate, and desperate people are dangerous. She will come for you again, Arya. Not for the house, but for the satisfaction of seeing you lose. This box, this is your insurance that she never succeeds." The next morning, I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I felt like a guardian of the truth. I placed the box in a modern safe in my office upstairs. I didn't tell my mother I had it. I didn't send a threatening text. I just went back to work. But the peace was interrupted 3 days later by a sound that made my skin crawl. A car horn, loud and persistent, honking at the gate of the driveway. I walked out to the porch and saw Madison's minivan. She was leaning on the horn, her face twisted in rage through the windshield. Beside her, in the passenger seat, was my mother. They looked frantic. I walked down the steps and stood by the gate, not opening it.
"Let us in, Arya!" Madison screamed, rolling down her window. "The bank sent a notice. They're taking Mom's house. You have to help us. You have that huge trust. You have to pay the arrears." My mother got out of the car. She looked like she had aged 10 years in a week. Her hair wasn't done, and her clothes were rumpled. "Arya, please," she sobbed, clutching the iron bars of the gate. "Your father has left me. He's filed for divorce. I have nowhere to go. You can't let your own mother be homeless while you live in a mansion." "You have a daughter, Mom," I said calmly. "Madison has a house. You can live with her. You're flexible, right? You'll figure it out." "Madison's house is too small," my mother wailed. "And Derek is losing his job. Everything is falling apart. You have to be the bigger person, Arya. You have to save this family." "The family died the night you gave away my car, Mom," I said. "The family died when you sued your own mother and called her incompetent. I don't owe you a cent." "You ungrateful little brat!" Madison yelled from the driver's seat. "We'll tell everyone. We'll go to the press. We'll tell them how you and Grandma are hoarding wealth while your pregnant sister starves." I looked at my mother. "Is that what you want to do, Mom? You want to involve the press? You want to bring more transparency to the Reynolds name?" My mother paused, a flicker of her old arrogance returning. "If that's what it takes to get what's mine, yes." "I found the box, Mom," I said, my voice dropping to a low, steady whisper. "The one behind the third stone in the basement. I read the journals. I saw the confession from 1988, and I have the letter to the St. Jude's board." The transformation was instantaneous. My mother's face went from pale to a terrifying translucent white. She let go of the gate bars as if they were red hot. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "I know everything," I continued. "I know why Grandpa didn't trust you. I know why Dad is leaving. If you ever, and I mean ever, step foot on this property again, or if Madison ever mentions my name to a single person, that letter goes out, and your life as the perfect socialite will be over. Do you understand?" Madison looked confused. "What box? Mom, what is she talking about?" But my mother didn't answer her. She backed away from the gate, her eyes wide with a primal sort of fear. She scrambled back into the minivan, her movements jerky and desperate. "Drive, Madison," she choked out. "Just drive." "But Mom—" "Drive!" I watched the minivan peel away, tires screeching on the asphalt. They disappeared around the bend, leaving nothing but a cloud of dust and a profound, echoing silence. I stood there for a long time, the wind from the ocean blowing through my hair. I had won. But as I walked back toward the house, I realized that the victory felt different than I expected. It wasn't about the money or the property. It was about the fact that for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for their permission to be happy. But as I reached the porch, I saw Grandma Eleanor standing there, looking out at the horizon. She had a strange expression on her face, half smile, half sorrow. "It's over, Grandma," I said. "They won't be back." "I know," she said, "but there's one last thing you need to see, Arya. Something your father didn't tell you, something that explains why Madison was the favorite, and why you were the shadow." The minivan was gone. The dust had settled, and the silence of the Hamptons afternoon returned. I felt a strange sense of lightness, the kind that only comes after a lifetime of holding your breath. I had faced my mother with the truth, and for the first time, she was the one who was afraid. But as I climbed the porch steps, Grandma Eleanor didn't offer a celebratory hug. She was looking at the ocean, her eyes clouded with a history I still didn't fully grasp. "Grandma?" I asked, coming to stand beside her. "What did you mean? What didn't Dad tell me?" She sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of decades. "Sit down, Arya. The box you found. It was about Diane's greed, but there is a second ledger, not one kept in a basement, but one kept in the heart." She led me into the living room, where the afternoon sun was casting long golden fingers across the floor. She picked up a framed photograph from the mantel,
a picture of my father as a young man, standing next to a woman I didn't recognize. She was beautiful, with dark, curly hair and eyes that looked exactly like mine. "Who is she?" I whispered, my heart beginning to race. "Her name was Sarah," Grandma said softly. "She was your father's first love, long before he met Diane. They were engaged to be married. She was a writer just like you, quiet, observant, and fiercely independent." "What happened to her?" "A tragedy," Grandma replied. "A car accident, 2 weeks before their wedding. It broke Robert. For a year, he was a ghost. Then Diane appeared. She was everything Sarah wasn't, loud, vibrant, demanding. She filled the silence in his life so completely that he didn't have to think. He married her not out of love, but out of a desperate need to stop feeling the void Sarah left behind." I looked at the woman in the photo. The resemblance was haunting. It wasn't just the hair or the eyes, it was the way she held herself. "When Madison was born," Grandma continued, "she was the image of Diane. Diane loved her because she saw herself. But then you came along, Arya, and as you grew, you didn't look like Diane. You didn't laugh like her. You looked exactly like Sarah. Every time your father looked at you, he saw the life he lost, and every time Diane looked at you, she saw the woman she could never replace in your father's heart." The room seemed to spin. All those years of being invisible, of being the shadow, of being called flexible. It wasn't because I wasn't enough. It was because I was too much. I was a living, breathing reminder of a love Diane couldn't compete with and a grief my father couldn't face. She hated me, I realized, the words tasting like ash. Not because I was a rough draft, but because I was the original version of my father's heart. "She didn't hate you, Arya. She was terrified of you," Grandma corrected. "She spent 24 years trying to diminish you, trying to make you small, trying to force you into the background so your father would stop looking at you and start looking at her. She used the word flexible to try and bend you into a shape that didn't remind her of Sarah. And Robert, he let her do it because looking at you hurt too much." I felt a sudden sharp pang of empathy for my father. All those years of him hiding in his ledgers, avoiding my gaze, letting my mother walk all over my needs. It wasn't just cowardice. It was a man drowning in a past he hadn't processed. "Is that why he left her now?" I asked. "In part," Grandma said, "but also because he saw you stand up at that party. He saw you refuse to be invisible anymore. When you stopped being the shadow, he had to stop being the ghost. He realized that by letting Diane suppress you, he was helping her kill the memory of the woman he loved." I leaned back against the sofa, my mind reeling. My entire identity had been forged in the fire of a secret war between my parents. My independence, my remote work, my quiet life. I had built them as a defense mechanism, but they were also a tribute to a woman I never knew. "Does Madison know?" "No," Grandma shook her head. "Madison is Diane's daughter through and through. She believes the lie because the lie benefits her. She thinks she's the favorite because she's better. She has no idea she was the distraction." I stood up and walked to the window. In the distance, I could see the gate where I had stood earlier. I thought about the letter in the safe, the evidence of my mother's crimes. And I thought about the photo in Grandma's hand, the evidence of my father's heart. "I don't want to hide anymore, Grandma," I said, turning back to her. "And I don't want to live in a house built on secrets." "Then what are you going to do?" "I'm going to call my father," I said, "and I'm going to ask him to come back. Not to live here, but to talk. Really talk. About Sarah, about me, about everything." I reached for my phone, but before I could dial, it began to ring. It was an unknown number. Usually, I would ignore it, but something told me to pick up. "Hello, Arya?" It was a man's voice, but it wasn't my father. It was Derek, Madison's husband. He sounded breathless, his voice shaking with a mixture of fear and something that sounded like admiration. "Derek, why are you calling me?" "I'm at the house," he whispered. "Your mother's house. Arya, they're gone. Madison and your mother. They packed a bag and left an hour ago. They didn't even tell me where they were going. But Madison left her phone behind by accident. I saw the texts, Arya. I saw what they were planning." What are you talking about? They aren't just running away, Derek said, his voice dropping to a terrified hiss. They're going to the city, to your father's new apartment. Your mother has a key he doesn't know about. She's convinced that if she can't have the Hamptons house, she's taking the only thing he has left. She's going to burn his records, Arya. All the evidence of the debts, the signatures, everything.
My blood ran cold. He's not there, Derek. He's at a meeting in Jersey today.
I know, Derek said. That's why they're going now. You have to stop them. If those records disappear, your father is liable for everything. They'll pin the embezzlement and the debt on him. They've already drafted a statement. I looked at Grandma Eleanor. Her eyes sharpened. She had heard every word. Go, she said, her voice like iron. I'll call the police in the city. You take the SUV. It's your car, Arya. Use it. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my keys, the ones that had been stolen, the ones that had been recovered, the ones that represented my freedom. I ran to the driveway and climbed into the navy blue CRV. As I peeled out of the driveway, heading for the highway to the city, I realized that the story wasn't over. The final battle wasn't going to be fought in a restaurant or a courtroom. It was going to be fought in the smoke and mirrors of the life my mother was desperate to protect.
I pushed the accelerator down. I wasn't the flexible daughter anymore. I was the one who was going to make sure the truth didn't burn. The highway was a blur of gray asphalt and flashing lights as I pushed the SUV toward the city. The engine roared, a steady, powerful hum that felt like an extension of my own heartbeat. For years, I had been told to be quiet, to be still, to be flexible. But as the skyline of Manhattan rose out of the horizon like a jagged crown, I realized I was done bending. I was a straight line, heading toward the truth. I reached my father's new apartment building in record time. It was a modest brick structure, a far cry from the sprawling suburban estate my mother had curated. I threw the car into park and ran toward the entrance, my lungs burning with the cold city air. I'm Arya Reynolds, I told the doorman, my voice leaving no room for argument. My father is in 4B. My mother and sister just went up. There's an emergency. The doorman, seeing the raw intensity in my eyes, didn't even check his clipboard. He buzzed me through. The elevator felt like it was moving through molasses. When the doors finally slid open on the 4th floor, I didn't hear shouting. I didn't hear a struggle. I heard something much worse. The rhythmic, metallic click, click, click of a lighter and the smell of something chemical. I threw my weight against the door of 4B. It was unlocked. I burst into the small living room. My mother was standing over a metal trash can in the center of the room. She held a stack of my father's private ledgers, the ones he had shown us at the Hamptons, and a bottle of rubbing alcohol. Madison stood by the window, her arms crossed over her pregnant belly, her face a mask of cold indifference. "Stop!" I screamed. My mother spun around. She looked like a different person. Her eyes were sunken, her hair was matted, and the elegant socialite was gone, replaced by a woman driven by a feral, cornered desperation. "You're too late, Arya," she hissed, her thumb flicking the lighter again. A small flame danced between us. "If these books burn, the debt belongs to the estate, and since your father is the primary account holder, it dies with his reputation. I won't let you and that old woman turn me into a criminal." "You already are one, Mom," I said, stepping forward slowly, my hands held out. "Burning those papers won't change the bank records. It won't change the digital trail. It will only add arson and tampering with evidence to the list." "She's bluffing," Madison yelled from the window. "Do it, Mom. Burn them. If the paperwork is gone, they can't prove the signatures were forged. It's our word against Dad's." I looked at my sister, the person I had shared a home with for 20 years. "Madison, you have a child coming. Do you really want Ethan's first memory of his grandmother and mother to be from behind a glass partition in a visiting room? Stop this. It's over." "It's not over until I say it is," my mother shrieked. She tilted the bottle of alcohol over the papers. "I have the box, Mom," I said, my voice dropping to a low, lethal calm. "I told you at the gate. I have the confession from 1988. I have the journals.
even if you burn every scrap of paper in this apartment, I have the one thing that will destroy you forever. And I've already sent a digital copy to Grandma's lawyer with instructions to release it if anything happens to Dad's records." It was a lie. I hadn't sent the copy yet, but in that moment, I realized I had to be as flexible as they had always wanted me to be. I had to bend the situation to save my father. My mother's hand trembled. The lighter flickered near the soaked paper. She looked at me, searching for a hint of a bluff, but all she saw was the reflection of Sarah, the woman who had truly owned my father's heart, standing before her, refusing to be silenced. "You wouldn't," she whispered. "You're too good. You're the one who always understands. You're the flexible one." "The flexible one just snapped," I said. The silence in the room was deafening. The smell of alcohol was overpowering. Then, the sound of heavy boots echoed in the hallway. The doorman had called the police. My mother looked at the door, then back at the trash can. For a split second, I thought she would do it anyway, out of pure spite. But the flame died out as her thumb slipped. She dropped the lighter into the trash can, unlit, and sank to her knees, burying her face in her hands. She began to wail, a sound of total, pathetic defeat. Madison didn't go to her. She just looked out the window, her jaw set, already calculating how she would distance herself from this. The police entered a moment later, followed by my father, who had rushed back after the doorman called him. He stood in the doorway, breathless, looking at the scene, his wife on the floor, his pregnant daughter turning away, and me, standing over the records, protecting his life. He didn't go to Diane. He walked straight to me and pulled me into a hug. It was the first time I could remember him holding me without hesitation. "I'm sorry, Arya," he whispered into my hair. "I'm so sorry." The aftermath was a whirlwind. My mother was taken in for questioning. While she wasn't charged with arson, the investigation into the re-emerged embezzlement evidence and the massive fraud she had committed to maintain their lifestyle began in earnest. She eventually reached a plea deal. She avoided prison but lost everything. The suburban house was foreclosed. Her social standing evaporated overnight. She moved into a tiny one-bedroom apartment in a city she used to mock, living on a meager stipend from a trust Grandma Eleanor set up, just enough for food and rent, with zero room for luxury. Madison and Derek stayed together, but the bitterness between them became their new housemate. They were forced to sell their expensive cars and move into a small rental. Madison tried to call me once to ask for money for Ethan's preschool, but I didn't answer. I sent a check directly to the school instead. I would help the child, but I was done being the family's ATM. As for me, I moved fully into the Hamptons house with Grandma Eleanor. We turned the basement into a bright, airy library. The stone where the box was hidden was replaced with a new one, engraved with a simple date, the day I finally walked through those restaurant doors and stopped being a shadow. My father visits every Sunday now. We don't talk about ledgers anymore. We talk about Sarah. He brought me a box of her old things, her favorite pens, her notebooks, a pressed flower from their first date. We are building a new relationship, one built on the truth instead of a memory. One afternoon, 6 months later, I was sitting on the porch watching the waves. The navy blue SUV was parked in the driveway, its paint gleaming in the sun. It was just a car, but it was also a monument. Grandma Eleanor walked out, carrying 2 glasses of lemonade. She sat down beside me and sighed with content. "You know, Arya," she said, looking out at the water, "I always knew you were the strongest of them. It just took the rest of the world a little while to catch up." I smiled, taking a sip of the cold drink. "I'm not the strongest, Grandma. I'm just not the one who's going to be moved anymore." I looked at the SUV, then back at my computer screen, where a new story was waiting to be written. My life was finally my own, no longer a rough draft, no longer a shadow. I was the author now.